Hey everyone, and welcome to The Rational Republican, a podcast where we look at complex issues facing us here in Oregon and around the nation. We'll try to address issues from a nonpartisan perspective and view our disagreements through a lens of respect rather than tribalism or divisiveness. I'm James Ball. This is Nick Perlasky.
Hey listeners, how we doing?
Today's podcast is brought to you by Prolift Garage Doors. Prolift is your one-stop shop for residential and small commercial garage doors, from openers, springs, and rollers to full reinstalls. They offer same-day service on all garage door repairs with no extra charge for evenings or weekends. Serving the greater Portland metro area, call today and set up your free estimate at 503-558-6349 or at proliftdoors.com/Portland. Again, that's 503-558-6349 or proliftdoors.com/Portland. On this episode of the podcast, we are welcoming Judge Vance Day.
Good, you got my name right.
I did, yes.
Good start.
Judge Day is running for the Appellate Court here in the state of Oregon.
Although you messed up that word pretty bad.
It's appellate.
Appellate Court.
Yeah. Appellate. That's something you chew
court.
on. It's like
a little very tiny little
appellate. Yeah.
All right. Well, this is going off to a great start here.
Yeah.
So yeah, Judge Day was former chairman of the Republican Party in Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
I'll let you tell the story, but had
You're stumbling through it.
Well, all right. Why don't you just go ahead and
well, as we were talking
introduce
off
yourself.
the
Yeah.
air, we were talking about where you were born.
Yes.
And I was born in Portland, so I'm a sixth-generation Oregonian.
Okay.
And I went to Lincoln High School like my dad went to Lincoln High School, like my grandpa went to Lincoln High School. And
I
my
lived
kid-
across the street from Lincoln High School.
You did?
So I did. Yep.
Really? There was a homeless shelter there. Is that where you were?
James had a rough couple of years in the garage door
Yeah,
business
yeah.
there. That's
Right.
why you have all the ads for
No, I
Prolift Garage.
used to live at the Civic, which is across the street from Providence Park. So
Oh,
we'd
okay.
walk literally
Yeah.
2 or 3 blocks from
Yeah.
Lincoln High School. But yeah.
Well, I left and went overseas. Actually, I went down to play soccer at a place called Westmont, and but then ended up overseas in college working for the Ritz Hotel. Ended up smuggling Bibles into mainland China, contraband, but they were Bibles, so that's okay.
There's
I
nothing
guess.
stuffed between the pages. You weren't
nothing
okay.
bad.
No.
No.
Just
people
life
who got
lessons?
caught got beat up, so I never got caught, thankfully. Spent some years in Middle East working on a master's degree in journalism, ancient historiography, and then worked for CBN News Middle East Television. Got a master's degree in government at Regent University. Worked there for a couple of years. Ended up in law school because my wife said I needed to go, so I went. And then ended up in Salem because that's where I graduated from, and started a law firm. Did that for 20 years as a litigator. Of course, you're both thinking that that's the first cousin to an alligator, and you're correct. That's true.
Well, based on my pronunciation.
Yeah, we know what an appellate
Yeah.
is at least. So.
And in the midst of that, I met some World War II veterans because I'd read some books, and I was originally a history teacher. And so the 101st Airborne 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment E Company was the subject of a documentary called Band of Brothers. Have you seen that, James?
Yes.
Have you seen that?
Well, it's good
Yes.
television,
Okay.
absolutely.
Absolutely. So Buck Compton, one of the lieutenants, and then Don Malarkey and I traveled together for about 10 years, and we would do
No kidding.
leadership. Yeah,
Okay.
leadership presentations all over North America and Europe, White House, West Point, Congress, Heritage Foundation. I have more fun with those guys than
Wow.
I should have.
Would you consider going back and doing leadership presentations at the White House now? Because I think they might need
I
it.
think they might need it, yeah. But I think our president would probably fall asleep. That's the problem. Or he'd start shaking hands with nobody that's there.
Oh, right.
I watched the White House Correspondents' Dinner last night. He literally did look like he was about to fall asleep, and it's just like, this is kind of your thing here. This is all about you.
I feel bad a little bit dunking on President Biden just because, I mean, the dude is so clearly just getting into old age, and there's absolutely no reason to be at that level when you're going through early stages of dementia. It's sad.
So you're
it's
conflicted.
really sad.
You feel bad because you see somebody in a compromised state, but at the same time, the dude won't step down.
Right.
So I don't think I should feel bad.
Yeah.
I think
That's
I
right.
should
That's right.
look at him and say, dude, you need to step down.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I wonder if that's why he
we'll
didn't
see.
get into the race a little bit late, because he was probably like, I don't think I can do this.
I
And
think
then-
Jill pushed him into the race.
You think so?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. She seems to be the fire behind the engine.
Yeah.
because clearly he doesn't have much.
I don't know who the fire is there, but so now this is interesting. I didn't realize that you were a history professor. Were there specific eras or specific wars, anything that you focused in on, or is there something of interest in your life in general? Or
my original degree, bachelor's degree, was in secondary education, social science, so it was history, and then I went on to work on that master's degree in biblical historiography. So
no kidding.
Originally it was ancient history, but I really fell in love with American history.
Okay.
Revolutionary. My family came to Plymouth in 1623, so it was on the supply ship Anne. They were part of that group, and so just studying my history for the last 40 years, and then getting involved with American history and politics, and I just love American history. I think it tells a wonderful story about who we are as a people, a culture, where we've gone, where we can go if we return to self-government. So I just love history.
Yeah, a lot of interesting stuff.
And now as I'm getting older, I'm becoming history. Yeah.
That was my dad's joke. He said learning history was easier in my day because there was just less of it that you had to learn. It's like, yeah, not wrong.
Well, kind of shifting gears to the Appellate Court.
Very good, James.
I can be taught. This is one of those things, and I haven't read a lot about this until you jumped into the race, but it seems that these are appointed positions in reality, if not in practicality. And I wonder if you could elaborate on that. So basically people are appointed and then they run unopposed and nobody ever challenges them. And so when you have 40 years of Democratic governors, you have 40 years of Democratic appointees to these positions.
That's correct. And that's not the way it was designed. The original judge in Oregon was my fifth great-grandfather. He didn't have any legal training, but he started a seminary in Iowa, and so the territorial legislature appointed him to be the judge. And then his oldest son, my fourth great-grandfather, they crafted those original statutes, and then those kind of fit into the Constitution. And frankly, the original idea was all judges should be elected by the people in their community because they know them the best.
Yeah.
And they want somebody to reflect their community. But what's happened over the last 60 years, 40 years primarily, since, Democrats have been in charge, 40 years approximately, is that judges will get elected or appointed, whatever happens. But then if the Democrat governor appoints them, then there's this little side deal, in my opinion, that they retire their fifth year of a 6-year term.
Yeah.
So judges get elected for 6 years. And then what happens is you retire at the end of your fifth year. Who gets the appointment? The governor. And she appoints or he appoints somebody who's in their ilk, their perspective, usually somebody progressive, and sometimes somebody who just fits a category that they think needs to be placed into the judiciary based on national origin or skin color or whatever. And so that's really destructive, I think, to the focus and really the purpose of a judiciary, and that you get qualified people who have experience and are able to judge cases appropriately, and they're the ones who are elected by their local folks. And so that doesn't happen anymore.
So is it similar to the Supreme Court where everybody sees the same cases, or does it or more like a traditional judge where there's one judge who sees a case and then a different judge sees a different case? I'm not sure how
Well, think about it this way. There's 3 levels of courts in Oregon. So you have your circuit court, and there's about 200 judges in the entire state. So about 180 circuit court judges in 26 different judicial districts. Those are your trial judges. And so they do the trials. So they do everything from divorce to death penalty, constitutional out of contracts, probate, everything like that. Above the trial judge is the appellate court. There are 13 judges on the Court of Appeals. And then above the Court of Appeals, there's the Oregon Supreme Court. There are 7 justices. So think about it this way. You go to trial, you get a verdict from a jury, and that verdict then gets transferred into a judgment, and the parties can appeal that judgment. So where does it go? It goes right to the Court of Appeals, 99% of them. And when you knock on the Court of Appeals door, they have to answer. They have no discretion. They can't say, James, you're from Bend and an idiot. You can't come into this court.
Happens more than you'd like to think.
So you have to take the case. Now, 80% of the cases stop there because the Supreme Court doesn't have to take one case. They can take 10, they can take 50, they can take 100. So it's a discretionary court. And so that's why I argue that the Court of Appeals is the most powerful court in Oregon, because it handles more cases on appeal and more cases die there. Out of those 13 judges, there's one chief judge, and then there are 4 panels of 3 judges. So, for example, if we were all on the Court of Appeals, the 3 of us, we'd get a case. The parties would brief it. We'd read all the briefs. Do you read, by the way?
As decently well, sometimes.
Okay, good. Because you got to read a heck of a lot on the Court of Appeals.
I believe it.
And then you hear arguments, and then you sit down, and the 3 of us would discuss it. We'd make a ruling, and then one of us would write the opinion. That's how that works.
Okay.
Does that sound exciting? I don't think so necessarily. You have that look.
Sounds important.
About 3 minutes ago, your eyes were glazing over.
No, to be honest, I had a beer with a buddy about a year ago, and I said I'd love to learn the difference between circuit court and appellate court and Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court versus the Oregon Supreme Court. What is federal court? What is district court? Because everybody, you love to throw stuff out. It's like, that's against the law. It's like, well, what law? Whose law? Which law are we talking about? Is this a federal case? Is it a state case? What are we talking about? So it honestly, it's wonderful to have that kind of explainer go through and especially, this is the stuff that, you see people talk about in movies about law school is, everybody wants to read, Justice Blackmun's dissent in an 8-1 case or whatever. But where does he get the notes from his dissent? It's from a state appellate court in a trial 10 years prior to that or something like that. So it's
if
one of those things.
If someone then disagrees with the appellate court decision, then they could appeal to the Supreme Court, who can then say, yes, we'll take it, or no.
No, go pound sand.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, think about it this way. Just about 4 or 5 days ago, in a Linn County case was brought up to the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals reversed it. That Linn County case affected every single Oregonian. It was a case where you had 13 counties and 151 different taxing districts.
We were talking about this on the way up. Let's keep going though.
Yeah, you led into one of our
Well,
questions.
it's an amazing case because it was based on a 1939 deal that the state made with the counties. And the county said it's a contract because they wanted our land and they wanted to manage it. We gave it to them, sold it to them, essentially, is the facts. And then the state's supposed to manage it, cut the timber, allow it to be cut, and then we get a portion. And it's been doing that for, almost 80 years. But in the 90s, they stopped doing it and they decreased it out of negligence, out of mismanagement. So all the counties said, hey, you're mismanaging it. You've damaged us. It's a contract. Yeah. And a jury gave him $1.1 billion with a B dollars.
Yeah,
$1 billion.
I'll tell you, to be honest, when I read that, I said, "There's no way that's holding up." There is 0% chance the state of Oregon pays $1 billion to anybody for anything like this.
Well,
so I heard that it was overturned, and I was like, there it comes.
Well, then I don't want to comment on the case too much. I just can give you the history of it because if it comes back and I'm on the court,
you got it.
Then I can't talk
makes
about
sense.
it.
That makes sense.
But the reason I want to make it to your listeners is that shows how powerful the Court of Appeals is. We'll see if the Supreme Court takes it up or not. I'm sure the counties will appeal because John DiLorenzo is the attorney on that case, and
well, they'd be dumb not to. For that amount of money.
Oh yeah.
But we've done a couple podcasts on forest management and those sorts of things, and you need to maintain these forests or else they burn up.
Lit on fire.
Well, it's called self-government. You're supposed to brush your teeth or you lose them.
Right.
You plant corn, you don't get rutabagas. That's what my grandma used to say.
This is one of the things
you get real bad corn that year.
That Metro's doing in my race is buying a bunch of land outside the urban growth boundary for quote-unquote preservation, but they're not managing it. They're doing nothing with it because they're a bunch of urban folks who don't really understand land management. And we were getting wildfires in western Washington County, which is real close to Portland, because all of this metro land was unmanaged, and it's a disaster. You need to be able to maintain these things, or else they burn up. So it's very important, even from an environmental standpoint, to have people that actually know what they're doing and not just bureaucrats buying land for quote unquote preservation only to screw it up and ruin it. So
beyond environmental standpoint, I think in any kind of standpoint, it's good to have people who know what they're doing. But that'd be a novel concept for the Oregon government,
especially for government.
Right.
We'll see. One race at a time. When Jimbo for Metro, we'll start there.
Yep.
But so you,
One at a time.
Judge Day, you are running for. You were a circuit court judge. You are now running for a judge in the appellate court system. Obviously,
or some say the
appellate. Yeah, right. Either way, you'll take the votes. Either way. And now, might I ask, what is it? Now, obviously, you feel that you are a better fit for that position than the current incumbent. Otherwise, you wouldn't be running against her. But what, in general, what is it that makes either a person qualified to serve on the appellate court, or a person who is going to do well and succeed and be a good representative of what it means to be on the appellate court?
Well, the statutory requirements are you have to be an elector in the county where you live and a member of the bar. So anybody could be on the appellate court. There's a lot of folks
there, yeah.
Yeah. But frankly, the appellate court looks over all the circuit courts. So they're really the referees for what happens in trials. So if a judge makes a mistake on the law or process or evidence or whatever it is, the appellate court is supposed to correct that. Mm-hmm. So my argument is that most of the appellate court judges should be former circuit court judges.
Makes sense.
And they should be also trial lawyers, because you're dealing with the machinations, what happens in a trial, which are critical. How do you pick a jury? Whether this evidence comes in? What is the law of negligence, and how does that work? Mm-hmm. And so the problem is, over the last 40 years, like you were mentioning, James, governors, when they appoint people, they do it for, political reasons most of the time, in my humble opinion. Sometimes they do it for qualifications. But there are circuit court judges and appellate judges who have never tried a case in their entire history. And that just is wrong. I mean, that would be like me. Let me tell your listeners, I'm not a big football fan, folks. I'm sorry to say that, but I view it as a leftover from the Roman era gladiatorial combat that just keeps the people in the circus happy. But that's a separate issue. But if you walked up to me and said, Vance, here's a striped shirt, a whistle, a little flag, go out there into this green grass field called the Super Bowl, and you be the main referee for the next Super Bowl. That would be a really dumb idea, because I have no experience being a referee. I'd just screw it all up. Well, that's what happens when you take a lawyer who's never tried a case and put him in as a trial judge, or worse yet, put him in as appellate judge. And my opponent, and she may have to correct me, but I don't think she's ever tried a jury trial in her life.
And so one of the other things that I don't think we mentioned, but I've been reading a lot about, is the reason a lot of these cases or these elections go unopposed is because you, as a lawyer, as an attorney, could end up appealing to this court and having someone that you lost an election to trying your case.
Yeah, well, and the right thing for that judge would be to recuse themselves, but they don't typically do that, from my experience. Yeah, when you
but that's voluntary. The recusal would be voluntary, right? They'd have to.
Yeah, there is a process for what we call filing an affidavit or affidavitting a judge, but that doesn't happen too often. Mm-hmm. The problem is that when a person retires in the 5th year, and then the governor appoints somebody right before the election, they swear in, and they get this little thing called incumbent when they're on the primary election ballot, and that little tag incumbent is worth 10 to 20 points depending upon the election. So whoever challenges that judge is already starting at a 10 to 20 point deficit in the polls.
And I believe judges are the only ones that actually get to run with an I, incumbent, next to their name. Nobody else does. I mean, if you pay attention, you know who the incumbent is.
So you always have to look, when a statute's written, you always have to ask the question, who does this statute benefit? Because there's always some winner that is behind that statute. And that's why the Code of Judicial Conduct was crafted, in part, and I agree with it, to protect the judiciary from being viewed as biased. Because, everybody brings their bias to a trial or a court. The key is you have to recognize it, set the bias aside, and rule out of the facts. So the Code of Judicial Conduct, though, has become like a shield for all judges who are, candidates, because they won't answer any question. So what's your favorite type of fruit, Judge? I'm sorry. The Oregon Code of Judicial Conduct doesn't let me answer that question. It's like, really? Come on, guy. People asked me, for example, the other day, well, Judge, what are you going to do with the Second Amendment case? And I looked at him and I said, well,
depends on which one, and there's a lot of context we need right there.
But I said, here's the rule. I can't answer that question because of the Oregon Code of Judicial Conduct. But what I can tell you is about my experience and my background. I've been hunting all my life. I have a concealed handgun permit. And next week, I'm receiving the Second Amendment Award from a guns rights group. So that should tell you kind of at least the context of who I am.
Yeah.
Now, I can't tell you how I'm going to rule because I wouldn't do that.
I don't know the facts of the case yet.
Right.
But, yeah.
But at least you can share your experience, I believe. And, here's what's going to happen, guys. I'm going to win this race. I will be the new...
I've seen you everywhere, so I believe it.
Those are my doppelgangers, and they really function well.
I swear, though, like I go to a lot of events, and every event I've been at in a couple of months, there's someone up there with your flyers handing them out. So if you're not personally, like your people are getting around.
When I do something, and this isn't braggadocious, I hope, but if you're going to do something, you just do it all the way. Why would you do something, as my dad said, half-ass? Don't do that. It just makes a mess.
Mm-hmm.
Probably literally. It's depending. You'd get into the semantics there.
Well, it is an old outhouse, I guess, colloquial term.
Oh.
You didn't know that, did
I didn't
you?
know that, no.
Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, yes. I don't remember what I said. But the funny thing is I do suffer from a little mental condition. And I noticed that you two have that same issue. It's called cerebral flatulence. Did you know this? That you sometimes, it's just like right now you're thinking, why are we talking about this? This is a podcast about Republicans.
This is what we're doing. We don't even have the benefit of red wine here to be drinking.
Everybody from time to time does that.
Well, the point I was making is that judges don't really run races. They don't like races. They think elections are like a punishment. And I look at it, and part of that reason is because I think judges, once they have the seat, and they've given up their private practice or wherever they're doing, they view it as their seat. Mm-hmm. It's not their seat. It's the public's seat. Right. That seat, position 3 on the Court of Appeals here in Oregon, belongs to the people of Oregon. It does not belong to Darlene Ortega, even though she's been there 19 years and she's never had an opponent. And she's a nice enough person, but it's not her seat. And so when some of my friends in the bar association, called me up and said, why the blank are you trying to replace, take her out of her seat? I said, well, hold on, stop.
Yeah.
This is the judiciary. The Constitution says every 6 years they run for office. And you're upset because I'm giving Oregon a choice? I thought you were pro-choice, Buster. And then they don't have anything to say to that because, they get this kind of arrogant view that that's theirs. Well, no, it's not.
Elections should be a choice, not a coronation.
Exactly.
Yep.
And I think
the Democrat who told me that.
Really?
Is it a Democrat who's currently elected to something?
A Democrat who has been on this podcast, actually.
Well, there we go. I like it.
Anyway.
That narrows it down.
Yep. Down to 2 or 3.
I was going to say, it's not that many. The Democrats, you're welcome. We'd love to have you on. But we just haven't had that many.
Absolutely.
So one of the things to kind of address the elephant in the room, one of the things that I most wanted to...
That was a pun, wasn't it? The elephant?
Yeah, right.
I thought there were 3
in the room. Yeah, right.
A few of those.
But you, during your time as a circuit court judge, Oregon passed a law that says same-sex marriage is constitutional. And you had said that this is not something that I'm comfortable with, this does not jive with my beliefs, and this is not something I'm going to do with, and had stopped performing same-sex marriages. You, if I recall correctly, had then stopped performing all marriages, I'm guessing as a... I don't want to say as a cover, but as a way to just kind of remove any part of that from being on your plate in the first place. But my thought would be if somebody comes in and says, okay, this is the law. I disagree with it, but this is the law, and it's now part of my job. I would have.
Can I correct you on 2 presuppositions?
Please do. More than 2 if I need.
3 or 4, James says.
Yeah. Right.
Well, one. Judicial duties do not include marriage.
Okay.
So it's a may, not a must.
Okay.
So under the statute, I can marry people, but I don't have to. Now, I did marry people because as a person of faith, it gave me an opportunity to talk to them about the nature of marriage. And frankly, if you're coming to a circuit court judge to get married, you may not have a lot of concepts about what marriage is really about.
Sure.
Sure.
And so I didn't have to do weddings, but I did. Second thing is that he was a federal judge in Oregon who was a former circuit court judge in Multnomah County. Obama appointed him to the federal bench. He got the case which challenged the Oregon Constitution, which said marriage is between a man and a woman. Mm-hmm. And so he said, no, that violates the 13th and 14th Amendment of the United States. And most of us who knew him knew that he wanted to marry his partner and wanted to marry his partner for years. So we knew where he was going.
Sure.
So as soon as he essentially ruled that constitutional provision in Oregon, that it violated the U.S. Constitution, it changed, it opened up what the definition of marriage. A lot of people think that judges make law. I tend to push back on that. We interpret law, we apply the Constitution to legislative acts, but we really don't make law in the traditional sense.
Okay.
Right.
And so what I chose to do is just say, I don't have to do the may anymore. So I just stepped back originally I told my staff, if somebody calls and they're same-sex couple, please refer them to my lesbian colleague down the hall. She'll be glad to marry them. And I did it very quietly because, number one, I'm a Republican. Two, I'm a white guy. I'm a little bit older, and I'm a person of faith, and I'm a little outsbut I already had a big target on my back.
There's enough coming at you,
yeah,
right?
Why would I wave this big red flag? I wasn't looking for attention. But through a different matter, my superiors found out about that, and essentially they complained to the Judicial Fitness Commission, which is kind of like the ethics court for judges, and I got brought up on charges, ethics charges.
So I'd be, and I do appreciate all that information. I'd be curious, would you ever consider running for the legislature and saying, this is what I believe, this is what I think is right, let's make the law? If you're not a person that makes the law sitting in that chair to begin with, why don't you run for a place where you can make the law?
Because that's your job.
Hey, if that's an endorsement, okay. I like it. Okay, we'll take it to the cleaners.
Well, I don't really jest there because I think my starting point is this, and really, the way I look at the world, your starting point guarantees your outcome. So if you're starting with a wrong presupposition about truth or life or the law, you're going to end up in the wrong,
well, actually,
destination.
That's really good because I think we had an hour-long drive to get here, and we're talking about a lot of this. And based on all the stuff that I've read, I didn't think there was an option. I thought it was part of your job duties was to perform marriages. I didn't realize that it was an option to begin with.
Well, if it was part of my job duties and my liberty of conscience was that strong to say I cannot participate, then I would have resigned.
Right.
That's the only thing you can do. If you have a liberty of conscience issue. See, liberty of conscience has to be tethered to an objective standard. You just can't say, well, my liberty of conscience is whatever and have no standard. To have liberty of conscience, you have to have an immutable standard about which you can judge right or wrong. And so my starting point is there is a creator. That creator made me. Therefore, I have purpose. Therefore, I have destiny. And therefore, I have meaning. Mm-hmm. And that my creator has fashioned into the law of nature what he believes should be happening. I mean, the law of entropy, the law of, a whole variety of laws that judges are designed to discover in a Blackstonian world. I know that's a little bit of history, but in our common law, Blackstone really articulated what judges and lawyers should do, but that shifted in about 1880 to 1900 when Darwinian view of law that was a humanist standpoint told judges that you get to make law. You get to insert what you think is right. And so that's been going on for 130 years now, and it's really screwed up. That's a legal term. Our judicial system, in my opinion, because a lot of judges start with the starting point, there is no creator. They're a accident of time and slime. Therefore, they're not here with a purpose, and therefore they have no meaning. And if you have no meaning, then power becomes your identity. And if power is what you believe in, then you're not doing necessarily what's right for everybody. You're exercising your power and you're quote unquote making law. Judges, in my opinion, under our Constitution, that's not their function.
Right. And I fully support that. I think we have way too many people introducing their own personal biases. Or like you said, everybody has biases, but doing your absolute best to set that aside and I really appreciate that.
Well,
So,
you look at
I'm also a Republican, so I don't know.
you're a
biased there.
Republican. We are Republicans because we believe in a Republican form of government, small r, and that means that there is a foundation to truth. See, if you don't believe in truth, then you can't be a Republican. And if you don't believe in absolute truth, that there is a right and a wrong, you can't be a Republican. If you think that just you get to make up stuff like that, then you get to be a Democrat because that's what they do. And so a Republican form of government chooses its representatives to represent them and create the laws, but those laws have to match the law of nature. You can't violate the law of nature. See, that's where we've lost it, that we can just kind of make up anything we want to. Well, actually, no, you can't. That isn't how it works. And if you violate the law of nature, you're going to end up creating chaos. I mean, look at Ted Wheeler in Portland. The law of nature says that if you don't have a consequence for an action, it creates more of that action, right?
Yeah.
And so he let 110 days of trying to burn down a federal courthouse, and they arrested a few people, never really tried them as far as I know. What's that do?
Let them go, yeah.
Yeah, it just creates more chaos, and more people say, well, look, well, I have to admit, I was driving here. It took me 5 hours to get here, and I was a little late. There was a little voice in my head that said, oh, yeah, and NPR, I heard that the state police really aren't pulling over people for speeding violations much anymore. So what did I do? I drove faster, right?
Yeah.
Because, human nature, here's a starting point.
I think everybody saw that during COVID when they
What,
basically...
that I sped?
Not you, everybody. I mean,
Every person.
there are roads that are 55 miles an hour that before COVID I would do 60 or maybe 63. And if I do that now, I have to be on the right-hand lane because people be blowing by me on the left.
Blowing is right, man.
Yeah. I mean, 80 plus on a regular basis down these same roads that like 63 was pushing it. And so, yeah, absolutely.
Here's a question to ask your listeners. What is your view of human nature? That's a starting point. And your starting point's, again, going to guarantee your outcome. It's going to create pathways for you to act. My starting point is that human beings, when left alone, do selfish, mainly brutish, mean, nasty things. And if I don't have somebody saying don't do that, then I may do it. There are some people, and a lot of judges, I've watched them, they articulate it in different ways, but they believe humans are basically good. And if you leave them to their own design, they will do good things. Yeah, that's just bovine material.
Right.
I don't see that. I mean, think about Chamberlain in the 1930s. He believed that human beings were basically good. Churchill said, no, they're basically selfish. Chamberlain trusted Hitler because his philosophy was, I'll create a context for Hitler. I'll kind of help him choose the right way. Yeah, how did that work out?
Yeah. Well, I think that's what our leadership in Portland is doing with the homelessness crisis, to be honest, is they think if we just give the right circumstances and the right help and the right programs, that everybody will generally kind of fix themselves. And that's not how addiction works.
No.
That's not how mental health issues work. You get down this path where that's the only path you can see. And no amount of carrots being handed to you is going to fix a deep, broken addiction and mental health crisis.
I was going to say,
and you need encouragement on the other end. You need to get people to do what they're... What were you going to say?
I like to think of myself as a good, rational, intelligent person, but when I'm left to my own devices, I eat Taco Bell and watch Rick and Morty all weekend. And you can ask my wife, it's not, I'm clamoring for it. I need some direction.
Well, I think this goes back to, you're a man of faith, I'm a man of faith, Nick's a man of faith. And
I'm glad you added that. I had my doubts.
Right. Well,
Nick's that gray sweater. Anyway. He's iffy, yeah.
The Bible talks about having a sin nature, and this is deeply ingrained in us. And I think anybody who believes the Bible is a Christian understands that sin nature. And you're right. When you look at it as people left to their own devices are going to be selfish, they're going to be. I mean, this is the basis for capitalism. Our entire social structure is based on the idea that people are selfish and will act in their self-interest. And I don't believe in pure capitalism. I mean, you get exploitive real quick if you don't have some guardrails in place. But the fundamental, foundation of our entire society is people are self-interested.
And you have to give them boundaries.
Yes.
And those boundaries have to be clear. They have to be fairly applied to all people at all times in the same manner. That's the rule of law.
Absolutely.
And the problem is that we're starting to see this equity theory, philosophy, invade the judicial system or the law enforcement paradigm that we've created. And as your listeners know, equity is based on treating people differently based upon either their ethnic background, their race, or how they were treated or oppressed in the past. So it becomes a binary choice. There's only really two choices. Either you're a member of the oppressed class, which everybody wants to be oppressed because then they get benefits, right? Or you're a member of the oppressor class, and there's nothing in between. And so the people on the oppressed side, they get lifted up because that's what that theory says. And those of us who are the quote-unquote oppressors, because we're privileged or we have education or you're white or whatever it is, get pushed down. That violates the constitutional principle of equality before the law. And if we continue down that path, because that's what my opponent teaches, she teaches that, at least that's my understanding from looking at the University of Oregon Law School description at what she teaches. If you infuse that into the judicial system, it's two separate standards for people.
Well, so I'll just provide the, I guess the liberal argument to that is that you have decades, if not centuries, of mistreatment of certain people. I mean,
true.
Not that long ago, we were Jim Crow laws. Another thing we were talking about. We get a lot of. We should just talk about.
Oh, by the way, who are the
things
ones who are in charge of the Jim Crow laws? Oh, that's right, the Democrats. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say the government, and this is one of the points that I've been trying to make. Is like slavery, government; Jim Crow, government; redlining, government. Why do we think the government is the good guy in this situation? Why do we think more government is the solution to racism?
Wait, that's a liberal perspective?
No, this is James's.
We switched back.
No, I switched back. The liberal perspective is we've got these centuries of mistreatment by white people to black people, for instance. And
I agree with you. As a historian, clearly
keep it out of the judiciary. I would agree with you on that. I'm just trying to, for conversation's sake.
Well, for conversation's sake, though, there are a lot of, my ancestors were abolitionists. So, just because of your skin color, if you come over from Guyana and you're a brand new, you got a green card, do you suddenly get the benefits of 100 or 300 years of slavery because your skin color is black? You've never experienced any slavery, but because the simple idea that the person's skin color now puts them into the oppressed status or the oppressor status, that violates the common law understanding that you do not hold a child of a perpetrator responsible for the perpetrator's crime. See, if you don't have that bedrock to our legal system, it becomes the government's choosing winners and losers. You don't have fair trials. You don't have a way. You're not under the rule of law. You're under the rule of equity or unfairness.
I have an interesting anecdote. I was at a party and talking with this black couple. The man grew up in poverty in the projects. But started a business, now has 50 plus employees, self-made millionaire. His girlfriend, and I won't say who they were, not that anyone would know them, but grew up in Nigeria. Family had servants, upper class Nigerian. You want to guess what side of the argument they were on? the self-made millionaire was like, capitalism's good, and if you work hard enough, you can get yourself out of this. And the wife, who grew up in Nigeria, was all on the equity train. And I wanted to say, like, you are about the most privileged person in this room. And you're talking about how Because I mean, you're absolutely right. She came from Nigeria, had servants.
But see, that also feeds
inherited
into
wealth. It was
that feeds into why modern day American progressives are so much on the equity train.
Mm-hmm.
Is that you think of the Kennedys who gained their wealth during the Prohibition, and fantastically wealthy, but yet there's almost a guilt complex with a lot of wealthy liberals that now they're going to have to rectify this social inequality, and they're going to require us to give up whatever we made so that they feel better. It's the strangest type of psychological derangement, as one of my friends would say, when somebody who's wealthy and got there through capitalism suddenly becomes a socialist.
Yeah.
It makes no
Bernie Sanders.
sense.
You see that all the time. You see Mercedes and Teslas and nice cars driving around with Bernie Sanders. It's like, well, now wait a minute. If you were committed to the bit here, we could be sharing the. Well, you could drive a lot less nice of a car and
give it to me.
Hey, there we go. Yeah, exactly.
That's what I don't get about everybody. All these wealthy people talking about increasing taxes. It's just like, bro, you can give money to the IRS. Like, they will take your money if you choose to. You driving that car and the fact that I see your name on the headlines means that you didn't do that. You want everybody else to pay more taxes, and you're like, oh well, I'm a millionaire, I could pay more taxes. Hey, bro,
knock yourself out. Yeah,
they will take your money. The IRS will take your money if you offer it to them. So, anyway, I think there is, and I think it's worth splitting the hair to say that the judicial system, and you're a judge, I mean, this is what we're talking about, should absolutely, everybody should be treated the same under the law. That should be no questions asked. Mm-hmm. I do think it's worth looking from a more social level at, kind of a more macro trend of different people groups who had been historically marginalized, and making sure that those internal biases that we have are not playing out into the future.
Well, and it is important to recognize what's happened in the past. We never should sweep that under the rug historically. But you cannot hold this generation responsible for what happened in the past to certain families.
Sure.
And so, on one hand, we have to recognize it and correct some of the cultural, but that's not the civil government's job. The civil government's job is that's the church's job. That's the business association job. That's the organizations that the NGOs that want to see that change happen, but not civil government. Civil government is there to provide, and it's supposed to be, as you said, limited. I mean, really, when you think about it historically, there are 5 forms of government. There's self-government, which is the basis of any republic. You have to be self-governing or you can't have a republic. Mm-hmm. 2, there's family government. There's church government. There's business/association government. And then there's civil government. And it all flows from self-government, individual governing units that we are. We give up certain things we delegate certain things to different forms. When you start a corporation, you're delegating your self-government to now a governing board. You're bringing on partners, they're getting capital, and you submit yourself to those bylaws. When you get married, Nick, you're married, right? You're learning this.
As far as I know.
As you know.
Unless my wife really doesn't like this episode or something.
But you got married. You made a conscious decision to become a co-regent, if you will, with your wife over your family. And you're responsible for those children. They don't belong to the government. You're responsible to educate them.
Yes, sir. And
so, same with the church. The church, you join the church, you become a member, you submit yourself to the elders. It's a spiritual kind of connection, but it also has some rules and they're supposed to discipline you if you're out there talking about Buddha in the middle of a Christian service. So there's right. Government in all those different areas, and we get, I think, too wound up around the civil government needs to do everything. No, it's not. It's supposed to be limited.
So, and honestly, you had just brought up an interesting point, because I think the 3 of us at this table, and probably a lot of the people that we have as our listeners, unless people listen to us, there's far left Democrats who just want to get upset or something. Well, probably, honestly, but that individuals both deserve to and need to be treated equally under the law. If you commit a crime, it's the same as me committing a crime, the same as you committing a crime. That's the crime is what the crime is, and it's not necessarily imperative to take the context into account. And maybe the three of us all get busted for doing heroin, and the two of you did it because it's a TikTok challenge, and I did it because we haven't had wealth and I'm down on my luck and I just need something to do for money. We can take the context out of it and just throw the book at somebody. And you had said the way that we can kind of go rectify that situation, because we do have inequity in society, we do have inequality among socioeconomic classes, races, genders, everything like that. That can be addressed by civic organizations or business groups or churches. And it strikes me because church attendance is down, and I think it's particularly down from individuals on the left, where maybe you were the good Catholic Democrat 50 years ago, but now you just don't go to church. Now your grandchildren just don't go to church. You view the government as your church. That is the body from which you are ordained your authority. And it strikes me as a bit of a bummer because now we're getting into like Robert Putnam bowling alone. The decline of any civic organization is rampant. I mean, there's no fire halls anymore. There's no bowling leagues anymore.
Granges, things like that.
Yeah. Anything anymore. People just hang out by themselves, and we're going to see it played
well,
out
they
in the data.
hang out by themselves in their phone.
Well, exactly. And if you're a kid, you're on the video games or whatever, and it's just like people just sit by themselves, and this is going to be exacerbated by the pandemic. But there is no group mentality. The only group mentality that I feel like 50% of the partisans in America, those on the left, see is government. They see this as the only place that we can come through and get together and get these problems solved.
Well, and Jefferson said that once the public discerns or realizes that they can vote themselves a section of the Treasury, we're in trouble.
That's the ballgame right there.
And that's what's happening.
That's
is
what
you
Bernie
get
Sanders
people
doing.
who are entitled to a certain amount of government benefits, and they feel like, no, that's mine, and you're going to pay for it, Nick. And what that does is it robs them of the self-worth of self-governing. The dignity of work is really important. And if you don't have work that is dignified, that you can throw your life into and enjoy and provide for your family, then you really lose that self-motivation. And it happens in socialist societies all the time. And, Jamestown, which was the original colony here in North America, failed because they had everything in common, and therefore nobody did a darn thing.
Sure, yeah.
Versus, and even my ancestors in Plymouth, they originally had common areas, and then they figured out, we better give land to people, and then they worked it. So when you're responsible for your own, nutrition and progress and provision, you work a little harder than if, Nick will do it for me.
Somebody's going to get handed. So, but I'd be curious for your thoughts on if we at this table agree that government is not the place to solve all of society's ills. We cannot legislate everybody being equal and everybody having the same opportunities. There has to be other organizations that do this. But we all also agree, all three of us Republicans at this table agree that we have, in the last 10, 20, 30 years, identified stuff that just wasn't talked about before. Stuff that women were treated less fair, black people were treated less fair, Hispanic people, Asian people, anything. And we've now at least identified and are aware of this. If the correct solution is that should be addressed by churches and civic organizations and business groups and societal gathering, whatever. If those are on the decline, is there any way to gin up participation back in churches, back in civic organizations? I mean, how do you get that going?
Well, I start with the presupposition that each person is responsible for their own actions. And so when you look at the societal problem of that some people have been treated poorly, and that is clear. I mean, but where does that end? I mean, the Irish were treated poorly. The Finns, my ancestors, were treated poorly. Maybe not to the extent, clearly, of a whole class of people from Africa who were treated as less than human, subhuman.
Right.
But again, you go back. Each person has to be responsible for their own actions. And you can't say, okay, well, gee, Vance, because you're white, therefore you're privileged, therefore you get to be we're relegating you to the oppressor class because it violates the dignity of that individual. I'm going to push back really hard on that. I'm going to say, okay, You may be right that I had a blessed upbringing. I had parents who cared for me. They loved me. They took care of me. They fed me. They sent me to a good school. But you look back in my history, and my ancestors fought for the Union. They were strong in their view that black people were just as valuable as they were. So you can't tell me that somehow I'm some oppressor. I'm not. That's what happens when the government starts to pick winners and losers based upon this binary model of you're an oppressor or you're the oppressed, because it violates that essential understanding of what fairness is. I mean,
sure.
Everybody has a sense that it needs to be quote unquote fair. At the same time, they also have to recognize that life isn't fair. Get over it. I'm sorry that happened. Pick up yourself, get back on the boat. And if you can't get back on the boat or on the ship or on the car, then we'll help you do that. But that's not the government's job. That's NGOs, that's churches, that's individuals. I mean, sometimes we become so compassionate that we actually disable people.
Yeah. I think we've crossed that line a lot lately.
It's the camping in downtown Portland thing.
Yeah.
I mean, they pass a law that says, well, you can't camp within 10 feet of a doorway. Oh, well, the implicit yes to that, or the implicit message of that is you can camp anywhere you darn well please, as long as it's not within 10 feet. But we grew up, there was loitering laws. And if we just enforce the laws that we have and try to help folks get out of this addiction, it's going to change our culture, I think.
So this is one of my biggest frustrations, and we talked about a little bit, equal representation, not equal representation, equal application of the law. But when we choose to not enforce a law at all, I think that is also equally damaging, because you get that, and it puts so much power into the hands of the person enforcing the law, whether that's the police, the judges, the whatever system that is. Because if they don't like you, you violated that law. But if you're fit some category or they like you, or hey, you
that's not the rule of law.
That's
rule of man.
Exactly.
That's rule of favoritism.
I am very much in favor of enforce the laws on the books. If the laws are wrong, repeal the laws. But giving anyone discretion over what to enforce and what not to is way too much power into the hands of those people, and it's not good for anyone. If the law is wrong, get rid of the law.
No, I agree with you 100%. And when people see that is how the law is applied to people, then they start to look for avenues to get out from underneath the law, or to grab some type of status that allows them favoritism. Well, I'm a member of an oppressed class, so you can't arrest me.
I'm a Multnomah County Republican. It doesn't get much more oppressed than that. I tell you what, I'm going to start texting and driving and doing heroin and all kinds of good stuff. I'll let you guys know how it goes.
We'll be sure to clip that and send it to people. So.
Yeah, right.
All right. Well, we are well over time at this point. So one of the things we like to do with all our guests is ask the question, who is your favorite Republican, if you have one?
Yeah, one of my favorite Republicans is Mike Huckabee. He's straightforward, he's affable, he has a caring nature, but he'll tell you what he thinks. He'll tell you that you got salad on your teeth and not to smile, or he'll tell you that, you're wrong and here's why you're wrong. I mean, he's straightforward, but he's a fun guy.
Also a member of my fraternity. Mike and me, both Teeks. I'll give him the secret handshake next time I see him.
I was going to say, I've met his daughter, never met him. I met Sarah.
She worked in Oregon. When I was chairman of the Oregon Republican Party, she was down in Bend working for the Bush.
Let's get her on the pod.
I didn't know that. Interesting. Yeah. All right. Well, Judge Day, thank you again so much for coming on the show. This has been a really interesting discussion and a lot of fun. So thanks again.
My pleasure.
Listeners, we will talk to you next time. Thanks for listening to the Rational Republican Podcast. Your hosts are James Ball and Nick Perlosky. The show today is brought to you by Prolift Garage Doors of Portland, serving the greater Portland metro area for all your garage door installation and repair needs. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, you can email us at james@jamesaball.com or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. You can find our episodes at jamesaball.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you find your podcasts.